Hey, well, hey, look, so we thought we would just, Andrew and I have these stellar conversations before we ever record our real conversations. And so we just said, let's go ahead and hit play and record now. And let's just talk through. So, one of the things, if you're a pastor, that we're dealing with right now is what's been called Sermon Gate. And one of
Dun,
our
dun,
own in our
dun.
convention, you hate to see it, but there's allegations of sermon plagiarism. And so you can go look at the details of that. You can go see that, who it pertains to. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about the idea of, and kind of where you come down and where I come down on this about use of other people's sermons in making a sermon. So I'll let you start, and then I'm going to tell you what I think.
Well, and yeah, so I've got a mixed view on this. One, I think plagiarism is wrong. You shouldn't ever use someone's work and pawn it off as your own. But there are plenty of sites and plenty of people that have just made their messages available, and their view is if this can bless another congregation, another pastor can use it, go for it. And I kind of am in a position where that doesn't bother me so much if a pastor is looking around to see how other people have broken this out and kind of maybe combining some different ideas and making their own message. I do. It bothers me more just to take a full message and just preach it as your own. I also noticed early when I got out of seminary that when I would cite people in my message, that was not usually very dynamic when you bring in, well, I borrowed this from this guy, that guy. So there's kind of an understanding that it's not as formal as research, and that you can kind of be a little looser on that. So all of that to say, it has, I think it's okay to dabble in that, maybe even in a busy season to use a sermon source book or a series that you really like and recreate that and offer that to your church. I think that's okay. I think that you should disclose that at some level, that this is, borrowed, or I heard a great message and I'm going to use this outline. And the church is very forgiving for those things. It's the problem that a little bit tends to become a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at, where you have people they don't write their sermons anymore, and they don't really care if they have really any original thought in there. And I think that betrays a bigger problem. So I'll pass it back to you before talking about what that is.
Here's where I'm landing on this. Okay. So, if you're going to, citing people is one thing, right? Like, I mean, I occasionally I'll find a great quote from even our sermon research and our commentary. And even that, sometimes it's like, no one really cares, but you do want to say, like, this is not original to me. This is something like, it is, citing in a sermon is a little bit different. If you're going to just totally lift someone's series, then you better say that at the very beginning, like, right, hey, we're going to be going through a series, and this is because here's the reality. I've been watching a lot of stuff lately, and people have been talking about, oh, this is crazy. The sermon, Sermon Central and all these sites. Like, as pastors, you and I get emails all the time from ministries saying, oh, buy this sermon series pack to use for your church. Like, that stuff is stuff that, like, just marketing, it's out there, Christian marketing. And so for a lot of people, I don't think they even blink about, like, I'm going to use this series. And I think in those regards, like, those are ones they're not even asking for, you've bought the series, you claim it as your own. But look, here's the deal. I have a huge, huge problem with all of that. I have a huge, and part of this is, you and I know, like, okay, let's when the Saddleback movement was big, and the purpose driven, everybody wanted to become purpose driven. And so what are you doing? Well, you're preaching all of Rick's stuff. Look, Rick's stuff is for Rick's church. And even when I was there, I mean, after a while, that's another lesson for another time about what I think about that. But then they would come and take these same outlines and move them to your church. And that doesn't work, because that was what God was giving to, or you think, qualifying that to one congregation. and you're not doing anything. You've not done any work. You've done nothing to see what does your congregation need to hear at this time. You've just kind of picked a series. And even if you pick a series saying, well, my church is struggling with these things, I'm going to use this series, but still, that's not you doing the work. I think there needs to be the burden of the preacher's burden. Like, I'm going to spend time in the text and let God tell me what my people need to hear, not let me just teach what somebody else has taught, which is good stuff for my people. I think if you're unwilling to do the work, then just don't do the job. That's my opinion. If you're a pastor who lifts stuff and is constantly just using other people's work, then maybe you shouldn't be preaching. And I'll say this too, and then I'm gonna stop because I get hyped up. If you're a pastor who hates preaching, let me ask you this as a New Testament theologian, is it possible? Should you be the pastor if you hate preaching?
Yeah, I think if you really hate preaching, yeah, that's a bit of a red flag, since, preach the word in season and out of season, be ready. That seems to go with the job. But there is that passage about, the elders, especially those who teach, assuming that maybe there is a role for those that don't teach or maybe don't have that preaching capacity.
But the qualification is that they should be able to.
They should be able to. And again,
Yeah.
you might be able to, and it's just not something that fires you up. Maybe and I think that's also maybe when we talked about polity and plurality of elders and those types of questions, there is a lot of strain on some of our pastors, especially some of the older model where you're preaching Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, prayer meetings, visitation, you bring all of that in. And you might have a pastor who is more fired up by pastoral care type tasks. We permit Sunday school curriculum. In fact, we're usually encouraging people, use Sunday school curriculum. It'll help you not be unbalanced, and it'll make sure that you're going through the whole text. And nobody's got a problem with a pastor using Lifeway Sunday school curriculum. So I kind of see that can bleed into the preaching environment as well, to say, okay, there's a series, God honoring people have put this together. And if they're going to permit me to use it and I've prayed about it, I'm going to lean on this. And then hopefully you're at least taking a little bit of time to make it applicable to your congregation, bring in illustrations and examples that would connect. And so I don't have that much of a problem with it if you're doing that thoughtfully, carefully, prayerfully, and it doesn't become necessarily the dominant way that you deliver messages. So again, in a pinch, in a tight spot, doing something like that, that's what it's for in my mind. When it becomes your regular performance of somebody else's stuff every Sunday, and you present it as your own every Sunday, I think there's a problem there.
So
yeah.
I would agree. The Sunday school curriculum is not so much an issue because those are small groups. Normally, you're having discussion of that too, and everybody's got a book, and everybody knows this is our form. This is to help us, because typically you're not going to have somebody who that's their main job. I mean, you think about what the pastor's job is. First and foremost, our job is to teach and preach. I mean, you even look at that in Acts 6, right? Of that we're not going to, we have the ministry of the word. We're not going to be using, waiting on tables. So if you farm out the ministry of the word to something else, to somebody else, then what are you doing? Right? Like I do think I don't think there's a time limit on how much. I mean, there's certain sermons that come and they come quick. So there's other ones that take all week, and you hate to say it, but sometimes it takes even till the wee hours of a Sunday morning that you it's been wrestling with, how is this finally going to fit? And it finally clicks almost before you get up there. Right. And that happens. And hopefully that's not the norm. But I do think that, that for the most part, your job first and foremost should not be clicking and buying sermons and just using them, but yours should be study of the word to preach the word. I get holidays, and that's why I'm so done with them. I'm done with non-biblical holidays. There's only so many Mother's Day messages you can preach. We had a I believe we had a professor at where we went to school who back in the day would have his sermons available. Um, and I know that people would buy stuff, packets and things. And apparently his biggest day always was the Mother's Day one. Because, I mean, really, what are you going to say? And there's how many moms can you make
Yeah.
real sermons on?
Proverbs 31, and
Yeah.
that'll be the source text. And if you want to get really, really sketchy, do something on the Virgin Mary.
You could.
But be careful.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many you can pick. And so like I look, these certain holidays, they're forced, but still, man, I guess at the end of the day, I'm very much against if you run out of all ideas, if nothing else, I think what's more powerful is just sitting and commenting on a text that you've done, 45 minutes of research on than using somebody else's stuff. I still think there's more power in let me just explain the Bible to you. And those back in the day when we used to do Sunday nights and you've only got between Sunday morning to Sunday night, you got another 2 hours of prep to do that afternoon to get ready. That to me is way more effective still than I bought my sermon series from Saddleback. Here's what I have for you.
But again, I think that the pastor should have room and be able to utilize that type of thing. But I think if you disclose it, that's fine. A church that is completely happy only being taught secondhand somebody else's stuff, that's a whole other question. But I don't think if you're disclosing it, you've done something wrong. I just think you may be deficient in that ministry. But and again, this has been going on for decades.
No, of course it has. This is nothing new.
You have Spurgeon actually commenting on one of his pupils using his messages and kind of laying into him. I mean, you're seeing all this stuff in Twitter now, and people are doing research. The reality is that if we've gathered to worship and we have heard the message, the word of God proclaimed, and we have worshiped and we've sung songs that we've sung before and that we didn't write. And the truth is, if we're genuine and all of that, I think God be glorified, will be edified, and we'll go out. So I don't think it is necessarily wrong, evil, terrible. I do think it unveils a little bit of a deficiency there, and maybe confidence. Like you're saying, it would be better just to pick up the Bible and talk out of it. And there's pastors who feel like they've got to perform too much to be that raw. And that might be a problem with church expectation, because everything now is so polished, and that bothers me. So it goes into some aspects of worship and those other things, but you have churches that have liturgies that they just repeat over and over. I would say this.
Where's the life in that though?
Well, and the message is usually supposed to be the fresh point, right? And that's a big question. Is that fresh or not? I think it's important that the pastor is the living voice. God is speaking through to the church. And so don't forfeit that responsibility by giving the church secondhand exegesis. Do your own work and study to show yourself approved, and then go for it and have some confidence. And I would say this, the church is going to forget what you said, 80% of it by the next Sunday. So if you're in a pinch like that, I would say this: if you've been diligent, you probably now have a year or years worth of your own material. That preach one of those, at least that was, and then bring in something fresh with regard to the current state and the challenges, because that's still better. You're the person God has put there to bring the word, and own that.
I would say if you're in a pinch, use something from your own devotional time that week, right? Like, that, okay, the Lord spoke to me personally on this. I'm just going to roll with that. Like, I don't know, man. I think this is it's a sticking point to me. I will say this. I allow for special circumstances for a used message. If there's something traditional about it. So for instance, in my context and like the church I grew up, or in my dad's context, that there were two messages that were the same every single year. And it was Christmas and it was Easter. And actually those messages came from the church that he grew up in. For those were the only two that were the same. And it was a tradition that was carried on. and it carried on, it jumped, and it was the next church. And everybody knows that. And everybody knows that these are the only two, right? Because there's something traditional about it. But when you do, I think on the whole, though, that is not neglecting your job.
Right.
That's something different. And so I do the same. I've carried up. I'm a third generation Christmas, Easter, so that's been preached for what, 70 years now? No, probably 60 years. Same every single year. And there's something special to me about that, the connection I have to it. But that being said, even that was, as I'm looking through, like I still have to be refreshed on the text when
Right.
I do it. Like I have to have it all there because it's still something from 60 years ago that I have to rework and to make fit for what I think is going on now. So I don't know, man. I one thing I heard recently in a conversation was about confidence and education to do the message. I wonder, here's what I guess I want to say this. If an MDiv is not strong enough to crank out a confident preacher, then why do we have them? Right? Like you would think, if you've gone to seminary, you should know how to do this. You should be confident. And if we're not cranking out, if still at the end of that road, we have people who come out with MDivs who don't know how to take a text and spend time in the text and work the text. I don't know. I'm a stickler on this, man. I very
Well,
upset about a lot of that.
and we've always, I used to say things to you like, I'm not sure preaching's that big of a deal, just to irk
Oh
you.
yeah.
But the truth is, it is a big deal, and you're more wired in that way. And I just am kind of saying that the MDiv is such a large degree because so much of it's not the preaching task. It's the pastoral care, it's the counseling, it's the languages, and then when are you ever prepared enough for your message? Like you said, sometimes you're wee hours of the morning trying to figure this out. And I've had days where it's like, I'm not there yet. And I put way too much into this baby to have a premature delivery.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, you know what, we're going to continue this study. And I'm going to go back to this text that I worked with in 2007. And I was a terrible preacher, but I've got an outline and I can now bring it fresh to my church today. But I would just, the key is that when you start leaning on other people's work, the tendency and the temptation is to lean on it more and more and more. And the pastors, I think we agree on this, they're abandoning their first duty, essentially, to be the teacher of the word. And that's where I see the sad part about this. This isn't an instance that you're seeing where somebody once in a while used something. It became the standard practice that every Sunday you didn't bring anything fresh to the church. And that's a big, big problem. That means that there's more effort going into the band members playing some songs for the congregation to sing along than the pastor put in to preparing the sermon.
Yeah.
That's backwards. And so this is a problem. And one of the things that exposed it was COVID and everyone pushing their stuff online.
It's true.
And, my stuff, by the way, I'm kind of making an allowance, but my stuff is fresh every week. I'm not using other people's stuff, but
for you.
I'm just, I don't want to necessarily be too judgmental because I understand the temptation. What I think that we should do is not be too judgmental, but just call people back to preach the word in season and out of season. That's your calling as the pastor of the church.
I think, get your priorities right and do what you're called to do. And still, I would say is I think you're still more effective just teaching something than you are trying to preach something. And here's the other thing. This is something that's key too, is your leadership as a pastor is tied to your preaching. I've heard other people talk about, that, when you divide up all the roles, you understand that whoever is the mouthpiece is the one who is leading. Granted, everybody's a leader, but whoever's the main preacher is the one who's being seen as, this is why we're going to do these things, and this is where we're headed. And so you've got to have someone who's thinking about, well, here's what we're doing, and you're going to have to lead through your preaching. How many times have you looked at your congregation and you have to say, like, we have to talk about this, because I know it's going on right now, or here is what is coming up, and this is how God in his providence, in our preparation for the message, it just so happens to be that the day that we are going to be starting to talk about serving, we have launched, and we're realizing, hey, everybody, we all should be serving, and here's our table. And so, like, I do think there's another piece of that is your leadership is tied into your work, into the preaching, and it should be fresh because it needs to be you leading your people, and that has to find its way into your preaching as well. And I don't think you can do that when you're just using and relying on. And I got to tell you, I think that industry should be dead. The industry of buying sermon series, right? I know that it looks great, and you're going to get all the good packets of slides and all the good intro videos and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you've bought a series, and it's not yours. It's just a great thought. And I don't think that actually does well to disciple or raise your people up too. So I'm passionate about this because it's something that I feel I've been frustrated over for years, knowing that I've watched people take the easy way out and just say, hey, I found this on Sermon Central. And they won't say it, but and I will say this is what's so dangerous in today's world now that this stuff's out too. Is if you're a pastor, you should know that people are going to Google your stuff. And you want to play the language game, you want to throw out, pretend you know your Greek and Hebrew, make sure you actually know it if you're going to play that, because I got a guy who's in there, he's always checking, he's always cross-referencing and looking up on his Logos software on his iPad to see if that's actually there in the text. You can do that in real time. You can type in, if you think that point was a little too polished, you can type that polished point in and find out, oh yeah, that's because it's been preached like 4 other times online. So little too polished.
Well, and the other thing, I think the temptation for this is, again, who is willing to say the Lord is going to work through me today, and it's not going to be, the PowerPoint's not going to be there, and just open your Bibles, we're going to go through it. That would be perceived negatively in a lot of churches today, especially the produced service churches.
Yeah.
And the pastor ends up having to have this persona of being this super teacher. And what you're seeing is, in order to maintain this persona of I'm a super teacher because I have a big church and I have all these things, is that they need this team to, prepare and provide them what they're going to say. They're going to spend more time on presentation than on exegesis. And then you see the Facebook memes with the pastor and his quote from the message, and you find out the quote from the message is not even his. And it's all about building up this super preacher guy. It's a persona, and it's pride. At the end of the day, all of these things are feeding an attitude and a heart that I don't think God is pleased with. And we're all tempted because all of us think that we're a little bit good at preaching, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you are. I always think I'm bad, so that helps me out quite a bit. But the key is, if you're faithful, you're genuine, and you're giving what thus saith the Lord to your congregation through you today, I think that's sufficient. And then work at it. Work at the craft. It is a craft.
It needs to be a regular part of your daily life of opening a text and working with it and asking God what he wants your people to hear, because you've sat down with his text. The thus saith the Lord, I think, is way more powerful when God has shown you in the text what you need to say, not when you think God has shown some other guy what to say and you say it to them, and kind of try to find that burden for those things. So I don't know, man. I understand what you're saying, which is, but at the same time, you don't want to mess around with this stuff, because really this is the health of your congregation. It starts with your preaching, and the way that you feed your congregation, it matters. Is it yours? Is it your word for the congregation, or is it somebody else's word for the congregation? And I know people will say, look, the preaching really doesn't matter because nobody remembers your sermons. And I've heard that so many times. But I was listening to MacArthur talk about this not that long ago. And MacArthur said, yeah, nobody does. However, I'm trying to paraphrase. It was something like it's the daily task it's that Sunday, week after week after week of training that you finally get somewhere and you turn around and kind of you're there and you've seen what's happened and changed. And so, yeah, it's not going to be those moments of, it may not happen. And occasionally there's a message or two that sticks with you like that, but it's just the daily submitting myself to the Lord and letting God speak. And those changes are going to come whether you remember the major points of the text or not,
Well, and I think that's the key is the Reformation said, that there's these channels of grace that everyone's talking about and God's special grace through the sacraments. And what we're missing is the primary means of grace is the preaching of the word of God. It is the power of the gospel.
Like that. There you go.
And that is, so again, even if you forget, God has chosen to use the preaching of the word for his purposes. So that should scare you. It should sober you, and it should drive you to be prepared, be ready. And so again, I don't think we disagree too much. I'm just saying that I'm not going to be too judgmental on the pastor.
You're a little softer. You're a soft guy.
I am. I mean, and again, John MacArthur, I don't think he does much more than research and preach these days. There's a lot of pastors who are wearing every hat on every committee.
Oh, it's true. I just was with our pastor upstairs of our African congregation, and they've moved into a bigger space on our property. And so not only does he help lead, but he's here midweek having to move all the chairs back amidst his other job that he's gotten, right? So like this guy, he's janitor, he's the tear down, break up crew. Now we're working on that to free him up on some of that, but still, I there's a lot of distractions for us. Like prior to this, I was just up putting a banner on a ladder on the outside of our building, and you're sweating because it's in the hundreds here in Phoenix. And, could I have just shut the door and said no? Sure. But, in a small church, you're going to have to do some stuff. And, but at the end of the day, I'm either going to, if I neglect the word, I'm going to take it home with me. And I'd like to balance it as well, where I'm not taking all my work home while I'm with my family.
Well, and you're called to be a husband and a father. And, so that's the thing. I'm softer on it than you are, but I would say this: never plagiarize.
Good. It's good start.
That way. And then if you utilize these things, you always have to take the time to at least address your congregation through them. Doing a rote presentation of somebody else is really a foul. So you've got to do a little bit of that work, and hopefully you've prayed through it, but don't become dependent on these things in such a way that you forfeit your calling, and it's a very slippery slope. So I would say do all that you can to not have to rely on these things, and preach the word, and get comfortable enough where you can say, you know what, I took the kids on youth camp. I got back Saturday night. I had to drive the bus, and here I am Sunday morning. And today we're going to talk about John 3:16 because it's always relevant. And let's get to the text. Have some confidence on something like that. That's okay every now and then. It's probably better.
The last thing I will say is I hope after years, if you're in it long enough, I hope there's such a richness to draw into that it becomes easier. And that was the other thing when I was listening to MacArthur say is after years of prep and after years of preaching, he says there's such a richness to draw into that his time to come up with stuff to be able to say, or his research is minimal because there's so much recall on everything he's already been done in all the preaching. And so it's a little bit easier down the road, but there are times where, you lean on what you know and just go with it. I will say this, I know that I always joke with my in-laws because there was a church they used to go to where the pastor, you could tell, did not want to preach at those Sunday evening services. And so he would have testimony time and then just let that go on forever because everybody's got to talk about, kids got to talk about the sleepovers they're having and all that and pray for those because there's coming up. And then he would just close his Bible and say, "Oh, this is so good. I don't want to top, I can't top this. Let's just end there," and it would happen week after week. It's like, don't do that. Just people want to hear the word. Teach them,
Right.
give them something, So
Right.
anyways, hey,
Well, and
that's it. Thank you for doing this with me. I just need to talk to somebody.
Well, again, I think that we're giving some people, we don't necessarily fully agree on this, but we do agree that the call to preach is the call of the pastor. And so take it seriously. So
I would say, I think you should like it. I think I will say, I think you should enjoy God's word and teaching God's word to people as a prerequisite. I maybe that's legalistic.
I'm going to go to Moses. Moses didn't like it, but he had to do it.
He's talking about Moses didn't. He didn't like the people.
Well, he was making all the excuses, and God said, fine, we'll use Aaron here. But it got to a point where Moses, some of it, you may not like it because of confidence issues, but if God called you to do it, you're going to have, so help me if I don't preach, right? There's going to be a fire, and you're going to have to figure it out. That's, and I'm the sacrificial Sunday night lamb. That's how I learned. I preached some terrible messages for a couple of years. Just inflicting myself on the congregation, but you get better at it.
That's right. And that's, God bless the Sunday night crew that will stick up. Like, I've looked back at stuff I started preaching, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like what on earth was I thinking? And yet that Sunday night crew were so gracious. But you got to cut your teeth somewhere. And well, hey, if you want to lift any of Andrew's sermons, you can find him at North Swan Baptist Church in Tucson. His website's right there. Do you list the outlines for people to just preach whatever from you?
No, not usually. It's just an extra step.
No,
but my devotions on Facebook and YouTube, Rumble, wherever, the podcast, those are based from messages, and it lets me get a second run out of them and kind of reapply them at the moment. So.
If you use YouTube, the captions, or what is it, the transcript, you could lift all of his points. And so if you would like to, if still have not heeded the wisdom of this conversation and are in a bind, Andrew has graciously said, it's okay for you.
And I want you to know, I'm preaching through Daniel, and the temptation to go to see what you just said 6 months ago in Daniel has been there every Sunday.
But that is just pure academic research that you could use, and all the points are right there. So it's very difficult. You're right. It's very difficult to not and just get everything you need right there. So don't worry.
I don't use your stuff. I just want you to know.
I never thought you would. I don't see the way my mind works. I would think it'd be very difficult, and there'd have to be something wrong with you to want to use my stuff, because it is not it's a free for all. It's a jumbled mess is what it is. So untangle that. Don't even try. But hey, thanks for talking with me about this. Let's shut this one off. Let's put this away. And this was just a little side conversation that ended up being 30 minutes long. Andrew and I have conversations like this for hours and hours sometimes, when we're allowed to hang out this long together. So I'm going to say I'm done, and we'll get on to some real stuff that, at some point we need to talk about is coming up. Like we can talk about remarriage. Is there a allowance for remarriage in the Bible after a divorce? That's really the big thing we're talking about. So I'm going to hit goodbye, but you can find that in the next video or podcast.
Let me just close with a verse here, just because.
Read it.
All right. The elders, this is from 1 Timothy 5:17. The elders who rule are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching.
Look at you. So, you brought the Bible into our discussion. I'm grateful that you did. Because it was almost, a Bible-less conversation. So, all right, man. Thanks a lot. I'm going to shut this off.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.